So today we've got two interesting points of discussion that we're going to tackle with our friend Jay Smith. The first is, were there Samaritans at the time of Moosa alayhi salam? And the second has to do with the Mi'raj of Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, or more specifically Al-Isra, when Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam traveled to Jerusalem. So what was there in the compound where Masjid al-Aqsa stands today? Was there a masjid there? Why does the Qur'an say that Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam went to a masjid? And in our bonus segment, we're going to look at some historical anachronisms in the book of Daniel. Stay tuned.
قرآني نبض حياتي قرآني طهر ذاتي قرآني عصمة أمري قرآني طوق نجاتي قرآني نبض حياتي قرآني طهر ذاتي قرآني عصمة أمري قرآني طوق نجاتي
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Respected viewers, I think we rather get right into the objections that Jay Smith has raised. So we already know the basic background to the series. Jay Smith is attempting to, after all of his decades of research and millions of dollars that he spent, he's attempting to now find 15 historical anachronisms in the Qur'an. So in his first video, he basically just gave a brief overview of what is a historical anachronism. And as we saw there, he couldn't even get the beliefs of Muslims right. Now in his second video, he comes up with two so-called objections, and the first of them we're going to deal with now. Now we need to understand that Jay Smith, at the end of the day, he's just another Christian polemicist, and most of them rely on ancient information that requires serious updating, and this is the perfect example of that. So this objection, and I think even the one that's coming later, they are objections that go back over 100 years. And in these 100 years, so much of information has changed, but you'll see Jay Smith regurgitates the same argument that was made by William Tisdale in the 1890s. He's regurgitating it today, and if you watch his video, it's as though he discovered this when he opened the Qur'an. So let's listen to Jay present this argument.
Let's just try to even find one, because it shuts down what the Quran claims for itself.
Exactly.
So let's go back to the screen again, and let's go and start with the first one. And the first one is this idea of the Samaritan. According to the Quran, it's very clear that there was a Samaritan in chapter 20, verse 85 and 87, and also verse 95 and verse 97. It says this, Allah said, "But indeed, we have tried your people after you departed, and the Samiri has led them astray. So Moses returned to his people, angry and grieved. Moses said, and what is your case, O Samiri?" So what is a Samiri in Arabic?
I mean, from Samara, Samariya, so that's basically a group of people, technically speaking. And the Quran is making a claim that that particular group existed at the time of Moses. That's what it's saying. In fact, by the way, I would argue from the Bible, it was Aaron and the people who were led astray and worshiped the golden calf.
Okay. So you have this problem because we're talking about Moses here. When is Moses living? 1400 BC. We all know that. That's very clear. But when you look at and you ask, were there Samaritans living at the time of Moses? No. So when were Samaritans created? They were not created in 1400 BC. They're created by Sargon II.
Exactly. After the first exile.
It was Sargon II who came from Khorsabad. He comes down to the 10 northern tribes of Israel. Right. He attacks the 10 northern tribes of Israel. Remember, he doesn't attack Judah. He attacks the 10
He attempted to surround Jerusalem and take Jerusalem.
Could not do so.
Exactly.
And so he took the 10 northern tribes, defeated them, and took most of them in captivity back up to Assyria.
And left some.
Then he took some of his own people to repopulate those cities.
Exactly.
They then married the Israelites that were left behind in the 10 northern tribe, and their progeny became the Samaritans.
Now, just to basically, recap this argument. Actually, before we go there was an interesting snippet there where you saw Al-Fadi, who's Jay's sidekick. He says that, well, I'd like to point out that in the Bible, Aaron was the one who helped them build the golden calf which they used to commit polytheism. Na'udhu billah. He's saying that Harun alayhi salam was a Nabi. This is what the Bible says. And this is one of the places where the Qur'an corrects the Bible and sets right the story that Harun alayhi salam did not assist any way in this shirk that the Bani Israel committed. So that's just a side note. Now let's basically recap the entire argument of J. Smith here. So J. Smith is talking about verses in the Qur'an wherein he speaks about Musa alayhi salam going to Mount Tur, speaking to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and while he's there, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells him that As-Samiri وَأَضَلَّهُمُ السَّامِرِي, Samiri has led your people astray while you were here. And Musa alayhi salam goes back and finds that they have built the golden calf and they began to worship it. So this is J. Smith's argument. He's saying that Musa alayhi salam lived around the 14th century BCE. This is generally, I mean, we don't really have any objection to this. And then he says, As-Samiri means Samaritan, and Samaritans only began existing in the 8th century BCE, so 600 years later. And so how could there have been a Samiri at the time of Moses, at the time of Musa alayhi salam? That's his basic argument. Now I want us to notice how they both, Al-Fadhi and J. Smith, differ over the meaning of As-Samiri. So in the clip, J. Smith has on his slide there, Samaritan. So he believes Samiri means Samaritan. And now listen to this clip from Al-Fadhi.
What is a Samiri in Arabic?
I mean, from Samara, Samaria, so that's basically a group of people, technically speaking.
As you can see, Al-Fadhi says, no, a Samiri refers to a person from a group of people who lived in Samaria. So he thinks that Samiri means Sumerians, and J. Smith thinks it means Samaritans. So even right off the bat, we're not off to a good start here. They both don't have the same belief of what Samiri means. Now, what's the difference between the two? This is going to be important later on, so let's just discuss it now. Samaritans are like a subsect or a religion that's very close to Judaism. So they believe in Musa alayhi salam, they believe in the Torah, but they have their own version of the books of the Bible. They have the Samaritan Pentateuch, and they have their own version of other books of the Bible as well. And they have, like a different belief about certain things. A very, very small group in today's time. So that's like a sort of religion or subsect of Judaism. Sumerians, on the other hand, which is what Al-Fadhi was talking about, that refers to a group of people who come from Samaria. Samaria is basically a place in northern Palestine. So you can see that they don't even, both of them don't understand what is the meaning and implications of the word As-Samiri. But let's go on, right? So J. Smith's entire argument rests on the fact that As-Samiri means Samaritan and not Sumerian, as Al-Fadhi said, right? Means Samaritan, that religious group of people. But I mean, what's his reference for that? How does he know that As-Samiri means Samaritan? If we go to the books of tafsir, if we look at the classical commentators of the Qur'an, we find a whole host of different views for what As-Samiri means. Some say, yes, like he's saying, it does mean Samaritan. Others say it means someone who comes from the city of Samarra in Iraq. Others, Sa'id bin Jubair, rahimahullah, for example, said that it refers to a group of people who come from Karman. There were different examples given and different opinions given on this topic. But J. Smith acts like, well, Samiri means Samaritan, and let's go on. But no, that's not the case. And in fact, if he had done some research, he would know that. So, in the beginning, we find that his argument has no real weight to it. It rests on a premise that Samiri means Samaritan, and that, as we can see, is not given by any means. However, let's, for the sake of argument, assume that As-Samiri means Samaritan, right? Just for the sake of argument, we're going to adopt that exegetical position that Samiri means Samaritan, and let's see whether J. Smith's argument holds up. So he says Samaritans only began existing in the year 722. So what he's talking about is that, after Sulaiman alayhi salam, this was like in the 900s BCE, the Israelites split up into the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. In the northern kingdom, you had 10 of the 12 tribes, and in the southern kingdom, you had the tribes of Judah and Benjamin. Now, the northern kingdom in the year 722 was destroyed by the Assyrian Empire, and at their head was King Sargon II. So he came, he basically defeated them, and he exiled some of them to other parts of his empire, and he brought people from those parts back into the northern kingdom. Now the northern kingdom is located in a place which is called Samaria. So the people who began living there began to be called Sumerians. Right? So that's what J. Smith is referring to when he says that Samaritans only began to exist in the year 722. But I want to ask, this is so fundamental, what were his sources? Like, he stated this as a fact, 722. That's when Samaritans only began to exist. But did he cite even one source? This is an academic, decades of research, so much of money spent, not one reference. So we're going to have to do the hard work and give you some references, and you'll see there's a reason why he didn't state his reference. His only reference was the Bible, and he kind of left it vague for a reason. So I'm going to read from the Encyclopedia Judaica under the term Samaritans, and you'll see that what the Bible is talking about is actually what Al-Fadhi unwittingly didn't even realize he was right in this. They actually back Al-Fadhi and they say that the Bible doesn't even talk about Samaritans. So here's the Encyclopedia Judaica. I'm just reading from that. This is an academic source. Little guidance is obtained from the name of the Samaritans. The Bible uses the term Shomronim once in Kings, in 1 Kings 17:29, or sorry, in 2 Kings, but this probably means Samaritans rather than Samaritans. The Samaritans themselves do not use that name for themselves at all. They rather use the term Shamerin, not Shomronim. So this is in the Encyclopedia Judaica, and all academic Christians have understood this, that since William Tisdale made this argument in 1890 till today, we've realized the Bible wasn't talking about the religious group called Samaritans. It was actually talking about the people of Samaria. And you can go look at the different translations of the Bible. The older ones, like the King James Version, will translate 2 Kings 17:29 to talk about Samaritans. But all of the newer translations, who are academics, who are done by academics, and they're up to date with what's going on, they're going to tell you it refers to Samaritans and not Samaritans. So clearly we can see that, J. Smith has no idea what he's talking about. His only reference was the Bible to say that Samaritans began to exist in the 8th century, and now we realize the Bible wasn't even talking about Samaritans, it was talking about Samaritans. So why did J. Smith avoid going into what the Bible really says? Because it's almost a scholarly consensus that the biblical narrative is flawed. Now I'm going to read to you from a scholarly source called The Keepers: An Introduction to the History and Culture of the Samaritans. And here it says, it is generally recognized that the account in 2 Kings 17 is not objective and unbiased history. And there are many other scholarly quotations. So Jay didn't go into this because he knew it opens a can of worms and it shows you all of the historical errors in the Bible, which he did admit to be fair. Now, one of those historical errors that we find is where J. Smith himself, and listen to this clip of J. Smith.
He took the 10 northern tribes, defeated them, and took most of them in captivity back up to Assyria.
So here you can see J. Smith saying that according to the Bible, most of the people of the northern kingdom were exiled by King Sargon. However, in the last 100 years, so much of new information has come to light about the about those areas and the people who invaded them, and records that we have, which show us, and I'm going to read from another academic source called Samaritan Judaism, and he speaks about the records that they have that tell us that only 5% of the people living in northern Israel were actually exiled. And this source says, this is evidence that the greatest concentration of people remained in the province until at least the 6th century. Clearly, the story of Samaritan origins in the Bible must be viewed with caution. So, if we've already established that, Sumerians started in the 8th century, so when did the Samaritans themselves start? So because we have so much more information now from the sources of the Samaritans themselves, right, like the Chronicles of the Samaritans, we can identify when they began. So I'm going to read now again from the Encyclopedia Judaica. And it says, until the middle of the 20th century, it was customary to believe, like what we saw J. Smith saying, that Samaritans originated from a mixture of people living in Samaria, right, in the year 722 or 21 BCE. The biblical account had long been a decisive source for the formulation of historical accounts of Samaritan origins. Reconsideration of this passage, however, has led to more attention being paid to the chronicles of the Samaritans themselves. With the publication of the chronicles, the fullest version of their own history became available. According to this, the Samaritans are direct descendants of the Joseph tribes Ephraim and Manasseh, and until the 17th century CE, they possessed a high priesthood descending directly from Aaron through Eleazar and Phinehas. And this is confirmed by genetic evidence that Samaritans go back right till the time of the sons of Yusuf alayhi salam, which was 400 years before Moosa. So even according to this, the Samaritans who Jay began this discussion with actually existed prior to Moosa alayhi salam conclusively, if we take that to be the tafsir of As-Samiri. Now, that was a lot to swallow. and I hope you got all of it. But I think the takeaway from that is that J. Smith has no idea what he's talking about. He didn't cite any sources. His understanding of the Bible, it seems, was completely wrong, and he used sources, it seems he used objections from over 100 years ago. Let's go on to his objection number 2, and we hope it'll be a little bit better. This has to do with Masjid al-Aqsa as it was at the time when Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam went there for Mi'raj. So let's listen to what J. Smith has to say.
If this is referring to that event, you have a problem. There is the dome there. I've seen put the picture on there. Can you see the dome? The beautiful golden dome, and there is the Al-Aqsa Mosque right below it. So if that is the case, and this is happening in 621, because that's when Muhammad flew up, supposedly, if he was alive, it happened before he did the Hijrah, the year before the Hijrah. Mm-hmm. The dome was built in 691. Right? Do you see it there? I'm just pointing to it in the blue arrow.
Al-Aqsa
of the Aqsa was built in 710.
Mm-hmm.
This event is taking place in 621. Do you see a problem there? There were no Muslims living in Jerusalem in 621. Islam hadn't even moved that far yet. Islam, if it wasn't even Islam, but the Arabs themselves did not conquer Jerusalem until 638.
Right.
So you cannot have Muhammad going up to a mosque called Al-Aqsa that existed in 621.
Right,
Now basically, I mean, what he's saying here in the first part of this was that, when Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam went for Mi'raj, then that place, the Masjid al-Aqsa that we know today, was only built after Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam. So how is the Qur'an saying that Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam traveled to al-Masjid al-Aqsa? That's his first sort of rendition of the argument. After that, as we played here, you see he says that, and him and Al-Fadi say, well, you know what, a masjid couldn't have existed then, because for a masjid you need Muslims to exist and then only a masjid can come about. Now that is really, really a stupendous claim. I mean, he thinks that Muslims actually believe that in the 9th year after Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam became a prophet, that Muslims had already reached Jerusalem. No Muslim believes that. So I think that they themselves have kind of got confused here. So let's answer this, right? The Qur'an in the same chapter, in chapter 17 verse 7, talks about the destruction of the Jewish second temple that was built and the first temple, and he uses the word masjid, وَلِيَدْخُلُوا الْمَسْجِدِ. This is clearly showing to you that the word masjid is a place of prayer, can refer to people coming before Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, people coming after Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's a true place of prayer for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So J. Smith has absolutely no idea. It's literally like 6 verses down where the word masjid is clearly used for people before Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, yet him and Al-Fadi are like laughing and they're like, oh well, a masjid can only exist after Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam and when there's Muslims there. So clear ignorance on their part, right? The second point to note is, and this is to answer a slightly more serious objection, where people say, well, at the time when Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam went there, it was completely flattened. There was nothing there besides the western wall. So how can you call that a masjid if there's no structure there? Now Jay isn't sophisticated enough to make that argument, but that's the normal argument you'll hear. So it's very simple to understand this. Masjid refers to the area and it has nothing to do with the building. If you want a clear example of this, look at the same verse. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Min al-Masjid al-Haram. Masjid al-Haram is not referring to the Kaaba and surrounds. It's not referring to a structure or a masjid built there. The ground itself, that is what is being referred to as masjid. And we know this if you look through the books of fiqh. They'll say that, even if it's talking about the Kaaba or even if it's talking about a masjid, even if the structure is demolished, the area and the ground and the land still remains a masjid. So that's a more serious objection. And if you understood this, you'll understand how weak Jay's argument was, because it's refuted 6 verses later in the Qur'an. But just listen to how they actually portraying it as though it's some unanswerable argument. Listen to this.
A huge historical anachronism, and I've yet to see a Muslim that can support this.
Yeah, but they won't be able to. All they have is just sheer attempts by man.
Okay, so that's done with the second objection. It's really that simple. Let's go on to now our bonus segment where we're going to give you historical anachronisms from the Bible. Now there's so many, I think in each video we'll give a few. We're going to look at the book of Daniel. Now the book of Daniel is very, very important to Christians. Why? Because in there they say are the prophecies that prove that Jesus is the Messiah and he's going to suffer and things like that. We do agree that Isa alayhi salam is the Messiah, but not that he had to suffer for the sins of others. And in the book of Daniel, Jesus quotes the book of Daniel in the gospel. So it's really important for them, especially the book of Daniel and the Old Testament in general, but especially the book of Daniel, that this is proved to be authentic. Now, I'm going to give you the references for what I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to be quoting the scholar of Christianity, Richard Carrier, and other academics like Kip Davies and Joshua Bowen. And you can see Joshua Bowen on his series, on his channel, Digital Hammurabi, where he talks about the book of Daniel. So the book of Daniel purports to be written by the prophet Daniel, living in captivity in Babylon in the 5th century. He's living in captivity. He was taken from Jerusalem now to Babylon after the Babylonians destroyed the southern kingdom. And while he's there, he's writing about his events in the Babylonian court where he's given a high status. Okay. Now there's so many historical errors that we find in this book. Let's just take 2 or 3. So the first one is we find there's a king there called Belshazzar, who's said to be the son of Bukhtu-Nasr, Nebuchadnezzar. But historically, when we look, Belshazzar was not related to Nebuchadnezzar at all. He was actually the son of Nabonidus. Secondly, Belshazzar is claimed to be the king there. Belshazzar was never ever a king. We have records of him from other sources which clearly tell us that number 1, he wasn't a king. Number 2, he wasn't the son of Nebuchadnezzar. He was actually the son of someone called Nabonidus. Right? Now this explains a lot, because in this book, in the book of Daniel, you'll see that it says that Nebuchadnezzar went insane for 7 years because of a curse of God and this and that. But when we look at the historical records, we find that it was actually Nabonidus who went crazy for 7 years. And Belshazzar, and the book of Daniel says that Belshazzar is the son of Nebuchadnezzar, when he's actually the son of Nabonidus. So what happens here is that the author of Daniel, who was writing centuries after Daniel lived, in the 2nd century, got confused between these 2 historical figures. Another very interesting confusion that he gets into is with a person called Darius the Mede. So if you read chapter 5 of the book of Daniel, you're introduced to a character called Darius the Mede. Now Darius the Mede is not known from any records, but the book of Daniel tells us that he created a system where he divided the whole Babylonian empire into provinces called satraps. When we look at the historical record, we see that there was another Daniel coming some time after Cyrus the Great who did do this, or who did perfect the system. Now, in the book of Daniel, this Darius the Mede is said to be someone who ruled even before Cyrus. So clearly Daniel is confusing these 2 historical figures, and he's made someone called Darius the Mede. The Darius that we know historically was not a Mede, he was actually a Persian. Another thing the book of Daniel gets wrong is it says, I think there were about 120 satraps or provinces. When we look at the actual historical records, we find about 20 or 30 there maximum. So you can use these arguments to show a Christian that the book of Daniel was not written by Daniel. It was written by someone, coming well after, and we're going to talk about this, the authorship a little bit later in another segment. But you can show that there are many, many historical errors in the book of Daniel. These are agreed upon by almost all scholars. Jazakallah khairan for watching. We at the IPCI would like to encourage you and anyone else who's interested in dawah, bring them along to the IPCI, request comparative religion courses, request material, join us on our dawah outreaches, help us to fund our Qur'an printing projects. I mean, right now we're trying to print the Zulu Qur'an, which there's very, very few copies of left, and it's in high demand. The people of South Africa are in dire need of the guidance of Islam, of hidayat from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which can come through this Qur'an, especially when it's in their language. So please, we encourage you to like this video, subscribe, support IPCI. Jazakallahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
قرآني نبض حياتي، قرآني طهر ذاتي، قرآني عصمة أمري، قرآني طوق نجاتي. قرآني نبض حياتي، قرآني طهر ذاتي، قرآني عصمة أمري، قرآني طوق نجاتي. آيات الله حمتني، غمرتني بالبركات، تحفظني من همزات الشيطان ومن زلاتي. آيات الله حمتني، غمرتني بالبركات، تحفظني من همزات الشيطان ومن زلاتي. قرآني نبض حياتي، قرآني طهر ذاتي، قرآني عصمة أمري، قرآني طوق نجاتي.